hottest day of the year and he decides, no, now's the time to sit down in front of a floodlight and get absolutely roasted before the video starts. Clever thinking, buddy. No self-respecting watch enthusiast doesn't know the name Blancpain. Does that even make sense? I struggle to read my own writing sometimes. It's a name that's steeped in history. Blancpain is defined by a handful of periods that placed them at the peak of the Swiss watch industry. Blancpain as a brand is the pioneer of the modern dive watch, the development of the O-ring system, external gasket technology, rotating dive bezel. Selected to be given to the Marine Nationale in the early 1950s as tested prototypes, eventually given to the US forces before and during the time in Vietnam under the name Tourneck-Ravel. These were the early instruments that passed all the tests of the period and is one of the greatest of all time. As an example, I had no idea that this existed, but some early generations of the 50 Fathoms, called the Mil-Spec 1, which were issued to the American forces prior to Vietnam, were tested and experimented on during Operation Hardtack. Does that name ring any bells? The Pacific Ocean Bikini Atoll. It's literally America's early underwater nuclear testing grounds of 1958. Now, if a watch can withstand that. And before we spend any more time diving into this video, on the wrist today is the Longines Navigation Big Eye. Still to this day, it's my favorite chronograph. I think the whole Type 20 aesthetic is amazing. Look forward to doing a video on that subject. I paired this watch with a sailcloth strap that's quite reminiscent of the 1970s with the holes through it. And it's just an amazing wear. 41mm, it fits so comfortably to the wrist, you don't even know that it's there. But it has all the tech, an automatic ETA chronograph, boxed sapphire crystal, perfect AR coating, just a fantastic watch. So like Panerai, Blancpain has an amazing background. And I want this video to focus on the sheer potential of this brand by addressing one model in their range that I have never been able to understand. I've gone on record saying that the Modern Bathyscaphe, I can't even think of an adjective to describe it. It's so odd to me. This is just an opinion of mine, of course. I know that many of you out there own this watch and love this watch. Nothing that I say should affect your enjoyment. But I also think this is the kind of watch that could make such a dent in the industry if a few things were adjusted and tweaked. And Blancpain has the formula right under their noses. So the aim here is to talk about the design of this watch and to show you how much potential the Bathyscaphe has at becoming a true icon, possibly one of the most beautiful modern dive watches of our time. I would sell the majority of my watch collection to own one of these pieces if they existed, and I will share the concepts and ideas at the end of the video. But let's all ask that one question: who wouldn't want to own a Blancpain? If money was no object, if size and design was not an issue, I bet the entire watch community would want to get their hands on a piece like this. Because here's the thing that makes Blancpain infinitely more important as a manufacturer. Under the ownership of Jean-Claude Biver, they single-handedly rekindled high-complication mechanical Swiss watchmaking. When makers like Patek Philippe weren't remotely interested in the complexity, where quartz was at its peak and the primary focus, so Blancpain released an entire collection of platinum masterpieces, from perpetual calendars to tourbillons and rattrapants, essentially making Blancpain one of the most valuable Swiss watch manufacturers at the time, and also putting high horology back on the map. Today the brand is known for the 50 Fathoms. They have had other great successes in the past, but the Fathoms, the Aqualung, the Bathyscaphe is where most of us look. And I also feel like, and I'm sure most of us feel the same, that this brand is overlooked by most people. Whether it's to do with their prices, the size of the watches, or something else, the majority are drawn to the other more well-known names. But Blancpain is a name that actually has history and provenance that most of the bigger names today had to replicate instead of innovate. I have to say that Blancpain sits on a winning lottery ticket with its designs. They offer some of the most beautiful and iconic dive watches, and all of these aesthetics are in their archives and they could be used at any moment and could so easily win over many more people if they could just shuffle a few things around. So the 50 Fathoms history is well documented: pioneering rotating bezel insert, legible balanced dial, groundbreaking gasket technology, a great size for the time. There is nothing quite like an original property, an original design, original idea. The fact that you're getting to own something like this is pretty special, and I think they managed to communicate that very well through their product line. So many innovations that just aren't talked about. The moisture indicator on the dial, the lack of text and embellishment, the full parkerized cases. But they always have been an expensive property. And the primary aim of the Bathyscaphe was to be the more affordable and approachable option. It was specifically designed for the recreational user as diving became more mainstream. And it was also created with women in mind, believe it or not. At the time when it was conceived, it was designed to be smaller for slimmer wrists. Now, the design of the original Bathyscaphe was pretty iconic as the original 50 Fathoms. So iconic that Seiko used it almost entirely for the creation of their 6.2 MAS. There is lots of debate today about whether or not Seiko stole this idea wholesale, whether this design actually belongs to Blancpain and they have no right to use it. I think it's clear now, all these years later, that Seiko now owns the property and this design is truly theirs. And the similarities between these two watches is quite astounding. You cannot believe how similar they look. So in the early 2000s, Blancpain reintroduced the 50 Fathoms in a larger case, larger scale, very upbeat and modern with all sorts of new innovations. By 2013, the Bathyscaphe reinterpretation was given to us, and we can see that this watch, what it manages to do very effectively is position itself in a different category. It does not look like the original Bathyscaphe, which is a good thing. Unfortunately, they couldn't copy what Seiko had done and sort of like treat it as a reverse, so they had to go in a different direction. It's clear to see that this watch borrows a lot of late 60s elements, you know, the nipple dial integration, the way the case has been positioned, the crown, the skin diver-esque bezel insert. But the climate around the modern Bathyscaphe has always been strange. And even if you go so far back as 2014 and you read reviews, you watch reviews of this watch, people seem to be holding it at arm's length. They don't want to address the elephant in the room. It appears as something, at least in the beginning, as something with more of a formal focus instead of a functional focus. The size of the applied plots on the dial next to the handset used, it's so odd, it's so different. Now what it does do is make for a unique design that is instantly recognizable. But as far as positioning itself as a dive watch, it's just something I can't get my head around. What has amazed me is how this Bathyscaphe diver has evolved, how they've integrated a chronograph system, how it's incorporated complications like a full annual calendar, and it looks fantastic. You can see the Blancpain is clearly doubling down with this dressier look, and utilizing the small batons and plots to their advantage, the fact that they can put so much more into the dial. Then we see how they experiment with materials on this piece, from steel, ceramic, gold, titanium. Let's cut to the chase. The main thing that affects Blancpain as a brand, the limited editions. Now, in most cases, when we have limited edition releases, the watches aren't all that exciting. They can be pretty good. Now, with Blancpain, their best watches are their limited editions, which is bizarre to think, and it's a completely different dynamic than usual, but that's the case. In this limited edition category, you get watches that are either 100, 300, or 500 limited. And in there, you get examples like the Nageur de Combat, you get the Barracuda, you get the Tornik Ravel-inspired 50 Fathoms. You get Hodinkee's example with the mil-spec inspirations with an actual moisture indicator. These are the watches that we all want, and we want Blancpain to expand on this and to use this as their chief inspiration for future models. We much prefer designs from the 50s and 60s, especially when they have a background of some kind of military provenance, when they were designed to be used effectively as instruments. And I feel that the way that Blancpain could introduce this formula and make it really stick and work is using the Bathyscaphe as the template. Offering dive watches in the 43mm size and the 38mm size, it covers a huge spectrum of wrists. And like I said in the beginning, all they need to do is look back in their catalog at these inspired dial designs and use them as the base, implement them into the Bathyscaphe case. Just for example, look at how effective the Hodinkee Bathyscaphe design was. Only belonging in a batch of 100 watches, only 100 people could get to experience this design. Now imagine if you took the Nageur de Combat formula, put it in a Bathyscaphe case. Through these renders that you're looking at now, the possibilities are simply endless. The many variations that you could include, the different materials you could offer, ceramic, titanium. Of course, unless you fix the price of some of these models, people will struggle to be able to justify owning them, but so many people would flock to your brand and look at the pieces more if they just saw these innovative designs incorporated. Yes, we could say that these designs today belong more to reissues than anything modern, but I still think that as a community we prefer the older, timeless styles. The majority, at least, are less inclined to look at these avant-garde, out-there pieces. You know, the final line I wrote in this write-up is that the Bathyscaphe has the potential of being skin diver perfection. They have all the ingredients to create some amazing watches, and what I just can't fathom is why they aren't doing it. Blancpain has such huge potential in this area, and they seem to continually not see it. Instead, more interested in releasing watches in very small batch numbers, and moving on to the next one. I'll stand by it and say that I think that Blancpain has one of the best back catalogues and historic-inspired collections that they could use to their advantage. And I hope that one day there is a future where we get to see it. Like I've noticed recently, the latest Air Command has been brought down in size and seems to be accepted well. because I'm sure I speak for a lot of us when I say that as a community, that we would all be interested in owning designs like these.